Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you're ready to join me in the deep woods. We have some camping to do. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was car camping with friends on the Oregon coast at a designated site in the woods. While I was carrying firewood, our camp neighbor came up and offered to help, and then introduced himself to the group. We invited him over for a beer, and it turns out his name was Jason, and he was a retired boat cook who used to work on fishing ships in Alaska, but now he's traveling the west coast and staying in campgrounds. Jason was kind of a quiet guy, but as the night went on, he started to get a bit off, acting suspiciously, not really interacting with anyone, staring off into space, and then getting up, walking 2 steps and sitting down again. It started to get pretty late, and we were all getting ready to go to bed. I usually sleep outside in a sleeping bag without a tent unless it's raining or something, so I set up my sleeping bag a little ways away from the fire and pass out. I woke up to Jason standing over me with a weird look on his face and my friends freaking the hell out. It turns out they all thought he stumbled back over to his campsite, but instead he went over to me and started stumbling/trying to roll me out of my sleeping bag. I was super pissed off at this point and tired, and we kicked him out of our campsite while I went to sleep in my friend's tent. Now at this point, I feel that I have to say that these might seem like warning signs, but the Pacific Northwest has some very strange and unstable people, so we honestly didn't think much of it beyond some weirdo getting too drunk and perhaps lost. The next day we all piled into a car to explore the town, and as we leave we see Jason sitting at his campsite, just staring at a lantern across from him. We're gone for about 3 hours, and when we return, Jason is still there, staring at this lantern. We were all making dinner later, when he comes over to our camp with a bottle of vodka and apologized for being so weird the night before. My friend accepted his apology and offered him a burrito, and Jason proceeds to start drinking the vodka and eating with us. Completely different guy. He seems really embarrassed and sorry for the night before. As the night progresses, he's getting quiet again, but I honestly thought at this point perhaps he's just down on his luck. Maybe a touch of alcoholism, and probably pretty harmless. Plus, he wouldn't take a hint to leave. After dinner, I was sitting on a log with my back to the woods, facing the fire, and my friends were all arranged around the campfire on chairs on the other side. Jason was sitting on the log next to me on my right, between me and the group. We're all having a great time and laughing, and as the night goes on, Jason is getting progressively more quiet and seems really angry. Around midnight, I glance over and notice that he's mumbling under his breath. Now I'm the only one close enough to him to sense this change, and I start to try to figure out what he's saying. I follow his gaze and notice that he's staring intently at the axe to the left of me. I didn't want to spook him by moving, but it's about this time that I hear what he's saying, and he's talking about stabbing us all with his knife, over and over again. He's got this really glazed look as he says that he's going to end us. I lock eyes with my friends across the fire, and he notices that something is really wrong and stands up, and I grab the axe and run as fast as I can to the other side of the fire. Jason gets up and starts to run towards us, and my friend, who's a big guy, grabs a hold of him while my other friends take his knife from him. We debated packing up and leaving, but ended up escorting him back to his campsite and sitting in the car until morning when we could report it. The next day at sunrise, when I head over to the camp ranger station, I noticed Jason was completely gone, with all his stuff, even though he'd already paid for 6 more days. I've done my share of deeper backcountry stuff and seen bears, heard strange noises, and was stalked by a cougar more than once. But to this day, the only experience I've had in the woods that made me wish I had a gun was this one. I've got a good through-hiking crew. We've done pieces of the Appalachian Trail, some Florida swamp, and a good amount in Maine. We consider ourselves pretty experienced. 2 of us are military. The other 2 are just fun to have around. So with that said, we emphasize preparation. This was probably 2015. We planned a 10-day trip in West Virginia along a river the weeks after Christmas. This is our favorite time to camp, because 1, we're all home, 2, bugs aren't around, and 3, no one else is stupid enough to camp at that time of year. We've done the trail before and felt comfortable with the forecast. Highs in the low 30s, lows in the teens, nothing we couldn't handle. We set off. Weather is great. The trail we're on is a 26-mile loop, handrailing a river most of the way. We eventually get to the spot we mapped out on the second day, about 14 miles in, and get ready to chill and do man stuff for the week. We rock out of the woods doing the usual for us, cutting wood, hopping into the river, hunting, fishing, writing, and the like. Now we've been out there before, and have explored perhaps a 3x3 square grid radius, and we didn't hear or sense the presence of anyone else near there. Things start to get gnarly. I'll get into the paranormal first though. It's 5 a.m. and we start getting into our morning routine. One of the guys heads the 10 meters down the river to catch breakfast. One starts checking on the NOAA forecast on the radio, and one starts to unfreeze our water filter. And I'm pulling out the morning firewood. I'm restarting our fire as it gets brighter. I notice there's this gorgeous pair of black labs rummaging around the outskirts of our camp. Pleasantly surprised, we are all pumped to find some pups, because we're idiots and none of us care where they came from. Within seconds, this raggedy-looking West Virginia guy appears out of nowhere by a tree, shotgun over the shoulder, sweet jean jacket on, and a cowboy hat. The good West Virginian look that I respect. He says morning and that we have a nice fire. The way he said it was chilling. We all felt like we could see right through him. We asked him how he got there. Mind you, the sun is barely peeking through the woods, and we're 14 miles in nowhere forest. And we haven't seen a trace of anyone in 5 days. The man says nothing, looks at us and turns to walk out into the dawn, with the dogs following. We're standing there dumbfounded, and when we find our pulse, immediately start looking from where he came from and which direction he was heading. Obviously we found nothing. No tracks, not even the dogs. But now to the survival part. We had snow in the forecast for most of the week, which we had almost every day. Not too much, maybe only 4 inches through the week, but we noticed it had started to get warmer. We're laying down for the night, checking our nightly forecast, and they're talking about the snow coming in for the night. No worries in our mind, at least it's not rain. False. We had limited cloud cover the day before, and the air was still pretty warm that night. The snow turned into rain. We hadn't taken rain precautions before we bedded down, since we were just expecting snow. We wake up around 3 a.m., packs and boots dripping. We get up to start getting an emergency plan together. The temperature is dropping, and we're wet. Precip turns to ice with a whole day of precip ahead of us. We end up packing everything up, try to sanitize our area, but one of the guys starts going down. He's really lean, so he's pretty susceptible to cold weather injuries. We get all our dry clothing off us and get him into them. We propped up a makeshift shelter of boughs and tarps and an emergency blanket for him while we finished getting ready to step off. We rucked the 14 miles back to our car that morning and drove the 4 hours back. Lesson learned, it always rains. I am a 32-year-old man, yet, as I say this in broad daylight, it still haunts me, to the point that merely thinking about it, or in this case, sharing the memory, is enough to send chills down my body and make me feel like a terrified child. I have only shared this experience with a handful of people over the past 10 years, because of how terrifying of an experience it was. But I feel like it can be therapeutic to get it off my chest and share it with others. Perhaps others have had similar experiences. To tell this story and to give it justice, I have to tell you of an experience that happened 3 years before the terrifying encounter. Buckle up, this will be long. My name is Joshua, and I live in Arkansas, and in late 2003, near the middle of fall, right before it started getting really cold, my wife and I were invited to camp with a friend of mine and his girlfriend at Sugarloaf Lake in Oklahoma. I say camp, but the actual plan was to meet at Sugarloaf, and my friend, Bob, wanted to take me and my wife around to some paranormal places in the Sugarloaf area. So we got there around 7 p.m. I was driving a white Ford 1996 F-150. Bob was driving a 1980-something white Celebrity, which was a really piece of rubbish vehicle. Anywho, it was late, dusk becoming dark, and we all climbed into Bob's car, and he took us around the area, first to an old abandoned house. But other than some raccoons just rustling around, it was a waste of 2 hours. Then he took us to a graveyard that was supposedly haunted. Again, it was a bust. Then an old church that was run down. Yawn. Nothing. At this point, it was getting close to midnight, and my wife and I were pretty bored. And I spoke up to Bob, saying, "Man, this really hasn't been that freaky of a night." That's when Bob smiled, saying that he was saving the best for last. He handed me a few Polaroid pictures of a hillside covered in trees in daylight. I asked him what it was, and he asked me if I saw a house, or any type of light pole or anything in the picture, to which I replied, no. He took the picture back and said that's because there isn't, and there's no power lines either. About this time, he turned down an old dirt road and passed a small house. Then after that, it was 2 miles of dirt road with woods on either side of a barbed wire fence, on the other with about 2 acres of field connecting to a wooded hillside. Nothing to light the night except the full moon above, and the clear starry sky. After what seemed like forever, he stopped the car and told us to all get out. We did as he said. He walked us to the side of the car, where the fence, field, and wooded hillside was. He looked at his cell phone, which, his phone and my phone, had no signal. This was 03, and this area had no cell towers. But he looked at his phone and it read 11:57. He told us all to watch the middle of the hillside. Even in the complete darkness, I could tell that it was the same field and hillside from the picture. 2 minutes go by and nothing had changed. Then at exactly midnight, a small flickering light goes off in the middle of the hillside. A chill runs down my back as my wife, Bob, and his girlfriend and myself watch this small light, which to me looked like an old kerosene lantern, begin to move, swaying back and forth. We watched in complete silence for what seemed like several minutes, when I finally spoke up and asked what the story was with this. Bob replied he didn't know, but locals had told him that at midnight every night, this lantern would light up and sway back and forth through the woods until the sun comes up and then it disappears. Nobody knew what the story was. At the time, I was a 19-year-old guy who didn't think anything would scare or hurt me. So, since there were no homes around, I yelled out, "We see you now. Not so scary with your little lantern." Bob hushed me, but it was too late. My wife screamed and pointed. I was laughing, but my laughter stopped as I looked up to the hillside to see the lantern swaying back and forth, but moving down the hillside towards the field at an inhuman pace. Gliding, it began to speed across the field towards the car. We didn't stick around to see what it was, because within a second we were in the car flying down the dirt road back to the lake. We looked back and saw the lantern slowly moving back up the hillside to where it first appeared. The ride back was silent, until Bob spoke up, saying, "Crap, I forgot to put gas in earlier, and the only store around is closed. And if we decided to go back out anywhere, it would be best to take my truck until he could get gas in it in the morning, as he only had about half a quarter tank left." I said okay, and a few minutes later we arrived back at Sugarloaf Lake. We had parked by the lake docks, and we dropped my tailgate and sat and spoke about what had just happened. Bob's girlfriend was pregnant at the time and told him she was hungry. He told her we had brought some snacks, but he said she needed actual food. But since the local store was closed, he asked if he could take my truck to the next town over to get some food because his car wouldn't have enough gas to get us into town. I obliged. We shut our cooler, put the tailgate up, and loaded into my truck. I turned the key and nothing happened. My truck was dead. Deader than dead. No ding, no lights, no clicking noise. Nothing, for all intents and purposes. You would think that the alternator was out. This was strange, and after the night we had been through, it made us feel very uneasy. We got out of the truck and popped the hood. We pulled Bob's car around to the front and attempted to jumpstart my truck with his car. This is where it gets even weirder. As soon as we connected the jump cables to his battery and mine, his girlfriend starts his car, and within a second of the cables in between, the connectors start to smoke, and in a flash of fire, they burn up, and within a few seconds, they were nothing more than bits of melted rubber and ash, with only the end clamps still on our batteries. Bob runs and turns off his car engine, and we take the clamps off our batteries. We look at each other in the early moon and starlit night. Did I mention there were no light poles around? And we both get a bad feeling at the exact same time, as we suddenly realize we had been hearing a distant noise in the lake that was getting louder. It was like a motorboat. Now, like I said, this was the time of year it was starting to get cold, especially at night. We were bundled up as it was, and we were standing still on land at night. But somebody was out on a boat After midnight? When it had to be chilly, as there's all that wind hitting them, and from the sound of this motor it was going pretty fast, but we saw nothing. That is until the boat was about 50 yards away, and a very bright spotlight comes on, temporarily blinding us all. Bob and I tell the women to get into his car and lock the doors. I reach into the bed of my truck and give Bob a tire tool, and I pick up another, as I work at a tire shop and had all kinds of tools of the trade in my truck. We were standing in front of the vehicles in the middle, the hoods up on both as the boats pull up to the dock, and two heavily bearded men in their 30s to 40s step out of the boat and walk up. It's hard to give an accurate description, as their spotlight was still pointed to us, and it covered the men in an eerie shadow whilst blinding Bob and I. They look at us, at our vehicles, and one glances in the direction of the car, at the women, and then back at us, and lets out a small chuckle. "You fellas got into some sort of car trouble?" one asks as he lights up a cigarette. "Yeah, but it's nothing we can't handle," I stammer. The guy with the cigarette sniffs the air and looks down between Bob and I's feet, and sees the still smoking ashes of what used to be the jump cable. "Looks like it was more than your terrible jump cables could handle. Y'all need some help?" We got some tools on the boat. That I think could help fix you guys' problem right up. Then the other man who had chuckled in the beginning says, "Fix 'em right up." I'm speechless at this moment, and my mouth is probably hanging agape. I can't remember as the two men walked back to their boat, and we heard what sounds like chains rattling around as we try to make out what they're doing, but the spotlight was so blinding we could barely see. Anyway, the chain noise was enough, and Bob looked at me without saying a word, and we both jumped into his car and drove the hell out of there. For the next few hours we drove to a populated area of the houses, which wasn't mainly in the rural area we were pretty much stuck in, since we had very little fuel. But we all sat in the car mostly quiet, looking around in all directions in near panic, thinking that at any given moment those men would find us. It had been a very scary ordeal. Bob would turn his headlights on every now and then, thinking he had seen some movement in the dark. After a while the women fell asleep, and Bob and I spoke about how strange this all was, and he laughed, saying, "I told you it would be a scary night. I just didn't know if it would be this sort of scary." At this point, the paranormal lantern wasn't even the main thing freaking me out, but the men never showed, and eventually the morning was on its way, and it was about 20 minutes until sunrise, and Bob asked if I wanted to go see if the lantern really disappears at sunrise. I asked if he was sure he had enough gas to get there, and he said yeah, the local store opens up in about an hour, so that'll be fine. I tell him in that case, then yes. We wake the women up and drive back to the hillside. We get there with about 4 minutes left of sunrise, and we still see the lantern swaying in the woods. Bob looks at me and I smile and do the motion for zipping my lips, as we all watch in wonder, as right as the sunrise hits the hills, does the lantern slowly fade away into nothing. After this, we get back in the car and drive back to the lake, feeling safer now. When we get there, there is no sign of the boat, and the hood of my truck is still up, and the doors are still locked. On a whim, I tell Bob I'm going to try and start the truck one more time before he drives us somewhere, where I can get a cell signal and call for help. And I'll be damned, the truck started right up there and then without hesitation. We all went our separate ways, happy to have seen the sunrise and counting our blessings and swearing to leave the paranormal investigating in the area to others and swearing that we never wanted to come back to this area and run into the boat people again. However, all things fade with time, even fear and common sense. 3 years later, Bob, who I haven't seen in almost 2 years at that point, calls me up and says he has a proposition for me. He goes on to tell me he has a group of himself and 3 other Wiccans who go out and do seances in haunted places, and asked me if I'd be willing to film one of their sessions in a haunted place for their records, and that they would even pay for my services. I am no Wiccan, but I've always loved the paranormal. Even after what I went through at Sugarloaf, I still had an itch to scratch when it came to getting scared and dealing with the paranormal and the unknown, and I told him yes, I would love to go with them, but I had no interest in joining in, but was okay with watching and just getting to be out there and looking into the paranormal once again. So of course my next question was, when and where we were going to be doing this. When he answered, I got a terrible gut feeling, and I wish so much that I had trusted my gut and told him that I had changed my mind. Remember that lantern light out near Sugarloaf? As if there were any way I could forget. Yeah? Why? I told my group this story, and they want to do the ritual there and see if we can contact the spirit and find out what it is and why it's there, Bob replied. I don't know, man. Oh, come on, Josh, trust me, you'll be safe. I'm going to pay you $250 in cash just to sit there and film it. At this time, I was about to become a father, and money was tight due to diapers, formula, and everything involved in being a parent does cost a small fortune. Not to mention it was my first kid and my new wife's first kid, so she had been going crazy spending money on not just the necessities, but also buying only top-of-the-line baby products, like toys, cribs, playpen, baby monitors, strollers, car seat, combination packs, and play/changing tables, diaper genie, designer baby clothes. So, because my wife was putting us in the poorhouse, I had to weigh out my fear of the area as less important, because it's what I needed to make the extra money. So, against my better judgment, I accepted the offer, and a week later, I was in the same seat beat-down celebrity Bob was driving 3 years earlier. This time with Bob and 2 other guys and 1 girl that were complete strangers to me. They each were dressed very gothic and had these pentagram necklaces. It was 11:50 when we got there, and the 4 of them sat in a tight circle, and I was behind them to the right, about 5 feet from the barbed fence that was in front of the field that led to the hillside, and my back was to the hillside and bushes at the fence line, and I was filming my friends circle as they all started chanting something. As I have been sharing this entire post, I have been getting knots in my stomach knowing that I was coming to this part of the story. This part of the story still haunts my dreams, and even waking hours to this day. I'm going to do my best to describe how the following unfolded. I know that mere words cannot do justice to the pure terror that ensued, or how horribly horrific the events surrounding were. So, when listening to this, turn your imagination all the way up, and believe me when I say this is a turning point in my life, and I was interested in the paranormal. It was a fun hobby to go out ghost hunting or get myself spooked or whatever, but after this night, I will never look at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore, or whatever. But after this night, I never looked at the paranormal as fun or interesting anymore. I just show respect and stay as far away from it as possible, as there is so much dread just trying to share this. As his group are chanting, Bob lights up this huge candle in the middle of them and opens up some sort of book. It's not like a scary antique spell book or anything like that. He starts reciting words from it, and then he looks at his phone and tells the group to be quiet and to look at him. I turn the camera, and at midnight on the dot, the lantern appears. One member of Bob's group blurts out, "Cool." I roll my eyes. Since the way these people were dressed and the way they carried themselves, the word didn't seem to fit into their vocabulary. Then Bob says to his group to join hands as they attempt to communicate with the spirit. I turn my back to the light and begin to film the group as they began again chanting, and Bob reads from the book. They then start asking questions in hopes the spirit will respond. About this time, a wind picks up, and Bob's candles go out. He tells everyone to hold on and tells me to cut the camera for a minute, and I oblige and stop recording as I watch Bob as he tries with his lighter. Then 2 lighters from his group, but none of them are working. I'm sitting down watching the group when I start hearing rustling behind me. I jump up, leaving the camera on the ground and spin around. Bob and his group are preoccupied with their candle and lighter problem, and as I spin around I'm blinded by the brightest light I've ever seen. What I believe was the lantern close up and personal, but as quick as it had appeared the light was gone, and the lantern was nowhere to be seen. If it had been the lantern that blinded me, it had moved from the hillside across the field and right behind me without me realizing it in the span of 30 seconds. I looked around for the lantern on the hillside and nothing. It was midnight, and the lights have always stayed on the hillside. At this moment, the wind quits blowing, and I hear Bob's lighter finally flick and see it light up, and I mutter, guys, did you see that?" They all turn and ask what I'm talking about, but before I can answer them, we all stopped dead in our tracks by a distant laughter coming from somewhere, everywhere, and nowhere. It was all around us nearly. And this is no ordinary laughter. This laughter sounds like the laughter of hundreds, even thousands of children to haunt me at this very moment. As I'm recounting this, I recall looking around the room I'm in. Whenever I think or talk about this experience, I can vividly remember that terrifying sound and hear it in my head. Also, it just occurred to me that when you put the letter S at the beginning of the letter, it spells slaughter. Why did I think of that? The best way I can describe this laughter is for you to imagine a large group of kids singing "Row, row, row your boat." You know how one kid will start and seconds later another will join? And then hundreds of thousands of children laughing. As if one would start laughing and seconds later another would, and the pattern went on in an endless loop. I'm not saying the laughter sounded like the song "Row, row, row your boat." I'm saying they sounded in unison, like when the kids sing "Row, row, row your boat" together. One would start, then another later would start, and then another later, and the laughter was getting louder and closer. There was sinister laughing, goofy laughing, giggling, and all kinds of laughter coming from all around us. This couldn't be real. This sort of thing does not happen. What the hell was happening? I scream at Bob and his group that we need to get the hell out of there, but they were already running for the car, leaving their Wiccan book and candles behind. And without hesitation, I run after them and jump into the car just as the laughter is becoming deafening. We haul us out of there and drive about a mile up the road and pull over, as Bob is in no condition to drive and we're all freaking out. We all get out of the car, pacing around it, asking each other if we had just really heard what we did. I tell Bob, and that I'm so sorry because I had left the camera behind. He says he doesn't care and that he isn't going back for it. At this point, I've got my hands on my knees, panting to try and catch my breath, as I have never in my life before been so terrified. That is when all of our chatter stops, as we once again heard the laughter off in the distance, very quietly at first, but slowly getting closer and closer and louder, until once again it's becoming deafening, and we jump back in the car and speed away. We drive about 6 miles, and for the first 3 we can still hear the laughter in the distance, with our windows down a little. We all begin to calm down by mile 4, when the laughter can no longer be heard, but we have no intention of pulling over, and Bob's friend is in the passenger seat with his phone, waiting for a signal to pop up. As he's about on mile 6, Bob's friend says he got 4 bars, and he hands the phone to Bob as he calls a friend of his who is into the occult and well-versed an educator in it. And as we are driving, he describes what happened to the lady. Bob told me his friend told him that she believed in the children of the Hector or something like that. I have no idea about what the Hector is, but something like more of a guess to me. Anyway, as Bob is on the phone speeding out of the area, me and the other 2 people in the back seat all get a chill at the same time, and they told me later that it was just like me on the hair of the back of my neck standing on end, and a loud snapping noise coming from the front end of the car, and Bobby's celebrity stops dead in its tracks and will no longer move forward. He tries everything, but the car is not moving. We later discovered that the tie rod had snapped. Anyway, the friend Bob was talking about on the phone only lived about 20 minutes away from where we were, and said that they were on their way. As we sat in the car, nobody spoke after about 3 minutes, until we saw a pair of headlights coming down the road towards us. We knew it was too soon to be Bob's friend, but me and Bob thought maybe we could get a ride from a local, and we all unloaded out the car and stood in front of it, waiting for the vehicle to come fully to a stop. Now I cannot be certain, but my gut tells me that I am correct. But the vehicle doesn't stop, but as it comes into view, it's a beat-up old pickup truck, and it slows down as in the truck there are 2 men in their 30s to 40s, with huge beards, and they stare down at us and speed up after passing by. I look at Bob before we can speak, and he was already thinking, the guys from the boat. Before I can say anything back, and see headlights coming from the direction the truck just went. Bob called his friend back and told her to drive like hell and get there now, and hung up. 4 to 5 minutes go by and we see headlights coming. Relieved, we get all our stuff ready thinking it was Bob's friend. Then his phone rings. It was the lady who was coming to get us, telling Bob she took a wrong turn and would be at least another 10 to 15 minutes before she arrives. Bob hangs up the phone and watches in terror, as do I, because the same truck slowly passes again, this time with only one of the boatmen in the truck. This time though, the driver starts to crawl by and says, "Looks like you fellas could use some help," and then speeds up and drives off. This cemented the fact that Bob and I were definitely dealing with the boat guys. But where the hell was the other one? Why wasn't he in the passenger seat? And to make matters worse at this point, something we had almost completely forgotten about due to the boatmen was immediately reminded to us when we began to hear the laughter again in the distance, all around us like before. Over the next few minutes, it started to get closer and closer. I'm almost urinating in my pants at the sound as it's getting deafening and we have nowhere to run this time. And then from behind our car off in the distance, we see 2 sets of headlights coming on and 2 vehicles coming towards us slowly side by side, taking up the entire width of the backcountry dirt road coming our way. The laughter now seems to be coming from the woods on both sides of the road, and we're stuck. And now the laughter is zeroing in on us as if hundreds and thousands of children are within reaching distance of us. There's no wind, no sounds other than the crunch of the tires on the rocky dirt road and the two vehicles that are slowly approaching us. With our last shred of hope fading away into the laughter of the children and the headlights of the two vehicles surely being driven by the boatmen, we are given a reprieve, as at the time, coming from the other direction, we see another set of headlights coming fast as we hold our breath. The laughter, the boatmen, what could be next? How will we get out of this? And that is when the vehicle that was coming fast pulls up, and it's Bob's friend. She unlocks the car and rolls down her window and begins to tell us to get in. When this happens, the two sets of headlights coming from the other direction turn off, and Bob's friend says, "Oh my God, you weren't kidding about the laughing kid," she screams. We begin to tell her about the boat guys, and she turns the car around, and no sooner had she started to drive away do the two sets of headlights come on again, this time with their brights on, and they go about a car's length behind the car we're all crammed in. We yell to go, channeling my inner Jeff Goldblum, telling her much faster as she floors it for about a mile or two, but the vehicles stay on our tracks. For about the next 2 miles after that, we can all hear the laughter way off in the distance with our windows down. But after about 3 minutes, did it subside. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened, what the laughing children were, why they followed us, and if the boatmen were connected to this somehow, or if they were merely a coincidence of that day that were also there to terrify us. And why they did not react to the laughing children sound. Is the lantern connected to the laughing children, or did Bob and his group mistakenly call forth the laughing children through their ritual? Like I said, this happened years ago, but I still feel just as terrified now when I tell people about it or think about it. I've had constant chills and goosebumps as I've tried to share this. So, I'm a bit shaky. To all of you who think the paranormal is just a fun hobby to get your thrills with, I beg of you and warn you that we are not prepared for what is really out there. You think nothing will scare you or harm you, but you are dealing with unknown things. You have no idea how mundane or powerful the paranormal could be. If you use the paranormal as a thrill-seeking hobby, just use caution and always have your vehicle checked out beforehand. Oh, and watch out for seemingly psychopathic hillbillies and laughing children. I hope we never meet again. One of my friends always has these get-rich-quick schemes or shady ways of making money on the side. In one of his more brilliant moves, he decides he's going to rent a house out near the country line to host illegal poker games. Anyway, this property is probably 4 or 5 acres with a tiny rundown church about 1,000 yards away on one side, and a redneck guy living in a trailer probably a quarter of a mile or so on the other side. However, the property backs up to the woods, and since it's always cheaper than the range, I and a third friend ask our renter friend if we can go shoot some guns on the property. He obliges us, and we head out there on a Saturday afternoon and find a nice barn at the tree line to go shoot into. Now we're just shooting paper targets with pistols, so we're not that far back and don't need that much room to do it. After a few magazines, we decide to venture into the woods to see how far back the property goes. We get down to the bottom of the hill and see the fluorescent ribbons that the surveyors tied to the trees to mark the property line. We realize the property is bigger than we thought, because we're about 150 to 200 yards in the woods at this point. Just as we're remarking about how big it is, we see a dead animal about 10 yards away across the property line. Walking up to examine it, we see it's a goat that's had its head cut off. Like, cleanly done by a human cut off. Then we see a severed goat head a little further away. The creepy part is it's not the same goat. The fur is different and cut differently. Imagine one head cut off a chin and then another cut off at the shoulders. Well, we didn't stick around to see if there was a goat neck anywhere, because we realized that it wasn't decayed very much and must have been done in the last day or two. Now, if we weren't armed, it would have been a lot scarier, but it was still creepy because I fear humans more than anything you can get out in the woods. Now, I say this was out there in the country, but it was in South Carolina, so there's not really a crazy expanse of wilderness being an East Coast state. That's pretty much all settled by people. The thing that gets me is that there was a serial killer they caught there not too long ago. This incident happened 10 years back, so perhaps he was killing animals first. While I was growing up, my family would visit the same lake every year for a week every summer. As we got older, we would visit a large rock called the Cliffs and jump off. The rock was only 15 feet tall at the highest point, but the water was really deep. When we got older, we would jump in and try to touch the bottom, but we never could. When my brother and I were in our teens, we took kayaks out to the cliffs to jump on our own. We jumped off several times, and when we got too cold, we took a break on the top of the cliffs to warm up in the sun. As we were sitting there, we noticed a white shape in the water, floating towards the surface. It was a letter, H. Eventually, it sank back into the water, and we lost sight of it. Before we could look away or say anything, another shape floats up. It was the letter E. Eventually, it too sank below, but it was soon followed by two more letters, L and P. We didn't jump in after that. We stood up and left without saying a word. We never mentioned it to anyone, and I forgot it had even happened for a while. Several years ago, I was working at a camp counselor, and I told this story as a ghost story. I'd forgotten about it, and I texted my brother to see if I hadn't just made it up completely. I asked him if he remembered the time we went jumping off cliffs alone and saw something in the water. He replied yes, that he remembered. I asked him what it was, and his reply was, the letters spelled help. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like. Let me know in the comments below. And why not subscribe and press the bell icon if you haven't done so already. If there is a story that you would like to share, you can send it to my Reddit page or my email. Either are fine. Just be careful with your punctuation, paragraphing, and grammar if you'd like it included in a future installment. But with that being said, for now it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.